Hello dear students, let us continue our journey with module 32 of unit 4, and today we are going to discuss about national income accounting in a closed and open economy. As you have already learned in your macroeconomic class, the basics of national income accounting, mostly focusing on a closed economy. We will be in this module trying to learn how is the national income accounting changes in case of open economy and the difference between an closed economy and open economy in terms of national income accounting. Now the key component of national income accounting is the gross national product or the GNP. GNP is the value of all goods and services produced in an economy during a given period of time for a particular nation. Now this includes the entire expenditure on the economy or the entire production in the economy. Now production requires factored inputs and thus factor income also is included in the GNP of a particular economy. The GNP of an economy has four main components. Consumption, which is done by private individuals to satisfy their want. Investment, done by the firms in terms of machinery, plant, etc. The government expenditure, which is done by the government on procurement of goods or capital formation in the economy. And the fourth is the net export, also known as the current account balance, which is the expenditure on export and import for a particular country. Now, we are going to understand this. Why is it called a national income account and not just national output account? Because the production of output itself requires income of factors of production, which are almost similar for an economy. Hence, we can understand national income account instead of national output account. Why do we require these fourfold classifications in terms of consumption, investment, government expenditure, and net export? Mind you, different factors may impact the economy in the different cycles. In order to isolate which factor is responsible and is behaving differently during a particular phase of a cycle, say during boom or recession, can be important in case of policy making perspective. Further, it is important to understand how this component can impact a position of an economy, like why an economy is rich and what factor contributes more for having a rich economy. As we have already remembered how Professor John Maynard Keynes focused on the role of consumption and government expenditure in changing the course of an economy during bad times. Now, moving on, we have considered GNP, that is gross national product. When we are using the term gross, which means there is a part of it which is not truly realized by us. Now note, while we are producing goods and services, a part of the capital gets destroyed or depreciated due to the wear and tears in the production process. This actually reduces the true value of output in the economy. Hence, this part of the depreciation of capital which took place during production must be taken care of to reach the true value of production of the commodity. So in order to get rid of the gross and to reach the net of production, we need to take into account the depreciation which must be subtracted from the GNP. The second part which needs to be taken into account are there are various unilateral transfers that a country may receive from abroad. This may be repatriations, this may be old age pensions, transfer incomes from the other country, which was earlier not added into GNP, but forms the part of income of the economy. Hence, this too must be taken into account. For example, India receives a sufficient proportion of foreign repatriation than what is produced in an economy, and that adds to India's income and hence must be added to India's income. So national income, which we may be termed as NNP, net national product, is GNP minus depreciation after taking into account the repatriations which the country has received from abroad. Mind you, there is significant difference between GNP and NNP. However, for this analysis, we will consider them simultaneously the same. In most of the country, analysis and data are easily available on GDP. Now, what is gross domestic product? Gross domestic product or GDP is the value of all final goods and services produced within the domestic territory of the country. Mind you, within the domestic territory of the country means within the political boundary, irrespective of whether the production is carried on by domestic factors or foreign factors. Although this GDP may indicate the production for an economy, it does not take into account what are the foreign components which may be repatriated. So, GDP may not be a true indicator for the production in an economy as whole. In order to get the true production, we must take into account what is the factor income which is going to the other countries and what are the factor incomes which are coming to our country. That is, GDP needs to take into account NFIA, net of factor income from abroad. So, we will be having GNP is equal to GDP plus net factor income from abroad. In case of India itself, the NFI factor is very high in a positive term. That is, we receive more than what we pay. GDP does not correct itself what GNP does for what is going abroad and what is coming from abroad. Let's take a short example. Suppose an Indian company is operating in Sri Lanka. Now this company in Sri Lanka is producing goods and services which will be added to the GDP of Sri Lanka. However, the profit may be repatriated to India and that may add to the income of India and not Sri Lanka. So, when we are taking GNP into account, this particular income which was earlier left out while taking into account GDP is now added. The opposite may also be true. There are companies operating in India who repatriates profit to their home country. In that case, India's true income is lesser than what would have been if we have taken GDP into account. So GDP and GNP may look different. We may consider them same in this case, and we will be focusing on GNP as a true nature. Now, let's study the national income in an open economic case. In case of closed economy, the entire output must either be allocated in consumption or production or government expenditure. That is, we now have only three components, C plus I plus G. The country has to satisfy its need depending on these three. But in case of international trade, when there is an open economy, there is a benefit of purchasing commodity from abroad as well as selling your commodity elsewhere. That means my consumption, investment and government expenditure may not be restricted by my income. That is, I may have over demand or I may have under demand and I may sell my commodity abroad and get some return from them. So we are going to see how these savings, investment and trade balances are going to change in case of open economy. In this case, the countries have option to save beyond their potential or to disinvest. That is, the country can borrow from abroad and consume now a part of their future income, or they can save and give it to other country so that they can borrow and get benefit from them. We will look into the component of GNP once again in a broader way. The first one is consumption. What is consumption? Consumption is the expenditure made by private individuals in order to fulfill their requirements. The simple expenditures that we make, like watching movies, like the food, the clothing, the entertainment that we enjoy. Component of national incomes of 4, consumption is one of the important one. The second component is the investment. Now investment is the expenditure by the firms on plant machineries like building infrastructures. This is important part of GNP as it increases the national stock of capital. For example, steel and bricks to build our factories are part of investment. However, it is to be noted that the term that we use investment in regular life may not be same as that of what we mean in terms of economics. Like buying a share or stock of a particular country do not add to any production of the nation. Hence, in true economic term, is not investment. Investment, according to us, in economic term, means production of new capital stock. So, it is a very important thing to note and be cautious when we are using the term investment. Another important thing to note is investment is relatively more volatile than consumption in case of national income. The third important component is the government purchase. Government may purchase for two reasons. One can be consumption expenditure, like expenditure by the government on police, defense, etc. And the second is capital expenditure, like creation of assets for the economy, like building dams, railways, bridges, etc. Mind you, when I use the term government, it can be the central government, the state government, or the local government combined. The government can have both consumption expenditure as well as capital expenditure. However, government also has transfer payments like scholarship, old age pension, unemployment pension, or widow pension, etc., where the government is providing transfers to people without any productive capacity of those people. These transfer payments are not included in our national income because no productivity has been done. Now, if you look at the national income identity in case of an open economy, what we observe that in case of a closed economy, any final goods and services that was not purchased by either the households or the government was purchased by the firms in terms of inventory investment. That is, the firm is keeping them so as they can produce and sell it in future to the consumer and the government. However, this led to the fundamental identity of national income in case of a closed economy. That is Y is equal to C plus I plus G. In case of a closed economy, there is no option of dissaving or extra saving because the total output is distributed between these three groups. Now, suppose there is a foreign trade. In case of foreign trade, the domestic consumer can now purchase foreign product. That means consumption can be more than that available domestically, while a part of domestic income may come from foreign consumers purchasing our commodity. Now, GNP identity in case of an open economy, national income shows this particular aspect where we are purchasing from abroad as well as have an option to sell abroad. Let M denotes the import that a country does from foreign country and X represents the export that the domestic country is doing abroad. The total spending C plus I plus G, which was the total expenditure domestically, may not necessarily be same to Y in this case. Goods and services sold to foreigners is now bringing income to my domestic country. So the total income in the country is Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X. And import is taking away the income from the country, so we are putting a minus M. This is our fundamental identity in case of an open economy. We will try to understand this equation from this particular identity. Let small m represent import and D represent the domestic nature in the country. The total demand for the domestic good in the domestic economy, that is showing Y as domestic income, is domestic consumption, domestic investment plus government demand and in domestic form, and the total export, that is the demand of domestic product by the foreign country of our domestic product. But total consumption, remember, is sum of consumption demand of domestic good plus consumption demand of foreign good. Similarly, investment has two components now, domestic investment component and a part of investment that is imported. Similarly, government can have demand of domestic good as well as a demand that government does from abroad. Now note, domestic consumption can now be said as total consumption minus import, similarly for investment and that for government expenditure as well. Now if we look into equation A and substitute these values of CD by C minus CM, ID substituted by I minus IM and D substituted by G minus GM plus X, we get this particular equation in the form Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X and minus of all the import component together, CM plus IM plus GM. Now since these are import components, we are terming it to a particular term, say M, which represent total import. So the equation we get here is that what we had earlier in case of our identity, which gave Y is equal to C plus I plus G plus X minus M. Now we are going to talk about one important part that comes with the open economy accounting, that is current accounting and foreign indebtedness. What is current account? The current account represent the balance between export and import. In reality, the current account or the trade is generally not balanced between countries. By that I mean that export may not always be equal to import. That is, in case of open economy, a country may import more than export or may end up exporting more than what they are importing from the other country. So this requires as current account, which is defined as the difference between export and import for a particular country. Now, if export is less than import, we will be having a current account deficit. And if export is more than import, we'll be calling it as a current account surplus. Now, what are you going to point with this? Now, note, if a country has a current account deficit, this country will be borrowing from a foreign country in order to meet up the requirement. And if the country has a surplus, this country can now lend to a country which is in deficit in order to fulfill its requirement. Now, GNP identity of y is equal to c plus I plus g plus nx shows one reason why current account is important in case of international macroeconomics. If you look the right hand side of the equation, that is c plus I plus g plus nx, it shows the total expenditure on domestic output, and it shows the changes in current account associated with the change in output, and this has an impact on the employment of the country. Current account is important because it measures the size and the direction of the international borrowing for the country. Mind you, borrowing indicates that this particular country is borrowing from its future consumption, and lending indicates that this particular country is trying to increase its future consumption by lending it to others. So this indicates an intertemporal decision for a particular country. When a country imports more than exports, it is buying more from the foreigners than it sells to them, and this requires them to borrow due to the deficit. And the vice versa is, if the country is exporting, it's earning more. If you see that, in case of this, current account can be defined as difference of y minus c plus I plus g. So what is the domestic income? The domestic demands for the economy. If we observe, there's another component which is very important in national income accounting, is the saving of a country. And how is this saving now related to the current account? Look, national saving is the portion of output which the household is not consuming or the government is not purchasing. For in the case of closed economy, savings was defined as difference between total income minus consumption minus government expenditure. And in case of national income identity, savings was equal to investment, because you know y is equal to c plus I plus g, and the same can be shown as y is equal to c plus g. So this savings is equal to investment in this particular case. Now national income in a closed economy, saving must be equal to investment. And if the country is to increase its capital stock, it must increase its saving. So saving was the way for the growth of the economy in case of closed economy. Now let's come to the open economy case. In a case of open economy, savings y minus c minus g, and we have now current account as x minus m. So GNP identity can now be written as savings is equal to I plus current account. Now the equation highlights an important thing about the difference between an open and an closed economy. Note, in an closed economy, in order to increase the capital stock, investment was required, for which savings was required. Now in case of open economy, without change in saving, capital stock can be increased. Look at the equation S. If I can increase I by having a current account deficit, I can still have a capital formation without any change in savings. Let's take an example. Suppose India is planning to build a dam, and India can do this by borrowing from, say, USA. Now, borrowing can increase the investment part as well as increase the current account deficit. Without change in saving, there may be production of capital stock in the economy with just having a current account deficit. This is an important aspect in case of international business. Another thing that is important is understanding private and government savings. Now, private saving is done by individuals, whereas government saving is that done by government. Private savings requires the difference between income and consumption expenditure, whereas government saving indicates the tax revenue minus the government expenditure. Private savings represent the disposable income saved by the consumer rather than consumed. So private saving is equal to Y minus taxes paid minus that consumed. So the net disposable income minus consumption. Secondly, government saving is the tax revenue of the government minus the government expenditure. Now the total savings in the economy is private savings and the government saving. So S is equal to Y minus C plus G is basically Y minus T minus C plus T minus G. That is private saving plus government saving. The definition of private and government savings can be rewritten in case of an open economy. Total savings, remember, was equal to investment plus current account. Private savings plus government saving was equal to total savings. Now we can write SP is equal to investment plus current account minus SG. In other words, investment plus current account minus tax minus government expenditure in the bracket. Or private savings is now equal to investment plus current account plus government expenditure minus tax. This is an important equation we can note. Now what equation is trying to show that is private savings is now related to domestic investment and current account surplus and the government savings. Now how do we interpret this equation 2? Let us define G minus T as government budget deficit, because government is spending more represented by G and the income of the government represented by T. The government budget deficit measures the extent to which the government is borrowing to meet its demand. Equation 2 states that the country's private saving can take into 3 forms. 1. Investment in the domestic capital, that is represented by I. Second, purchase of wealth from the foreigner, which is represented by the current account deficit. And purchase of the domestic government by issuing different kind of debt, represented by G minus T. Note that in case of closed economy, the current account was 0. So this component was 0 and we had private saving is equal to investment plus that of budget deficit. In case of closed economy, this difference is different from that of an open economy. So dear students, in this particular module, what we learned is how the national income accounting differs between that of an open economy and a closed economy. How the national income accounting differs is 1. Earlier, in a closed economy, the country is restricted by the amount of borrowing they can have is 0. The total saving must be within the country and that determines the investment in the country, which in turn determines the capital stock of the country. That means the growth of the country was limited to its savings potential. Come to open economy. This economy can now borrow from other country to finance its overconsumption than its income. Although this is an intertemporal decision, that is, when you are borrowing, you are basically sacrificing your future consumption for current consumption. In case of foreign consumption of current requirement and hence the understanding. Thank you very much for your patience.